In the middle of that heated exchange, what stood out most was not Kellyanne Conway's biting critique, but Jasmine Crockett's refusal to match fire with fire. The instinct in politics, especially in front of cameras or a crowded room, is often to rise to the level of the attack louder voices, sharper words, and a constant attempt to dominate the space. But Crockett chose a different path, one that demonstrated how composure can often achieve more than combat. Kellyanne came into the moment with all the sharpness people expected of her, delivering lines meant to provoke, each dripping with the confidence of someone who had been a senior counselor to the president and had sparred against some of the toughest interviewers in the country. Her approach was deliberate traits of voice, just enough to project authority, throw in barbed phrases that hinted at personal critique, and smile as if daring her opponent to lose control. Crockett, however, sat still, eyes steady, and didn't give Kellyanne what she wanted. That restraint itself spoke volumes. It sent a message that she was not rattled, not intimidated, and not about to play into a script that Conway had likely perfected over the years. Composure, in this case, became a quiet kind of power. The very fact that Crockett didn't rush to interrupt or throw her own verbal punches meant that when she finally did speak, her words carried more weight. People listened not because she was louder, but because she was measured. The room leaned in, waiting to hear how she would respond after all the noise. When she began, her voice was steady, each word deliberate, and she immediately shifted the energy in the room. She acknowledged the critique without defensiveness, and then turned the spotlight back on Kellyanne by calmly saying, "It's rich that you want to lecture me on sound bites when your career has been one long string of them." Crockett didn't just deflect, she reframed the entire exchange. She reminded the room that Kellyanne was known less for substance and more for carefully packaged lines that filled headlines. But she did this without shouting, without sarcasm, and without venom. The calmness in her delivery made it sting far more than if she had tried to match Conway's intensity. The lesson that emerged was clear. Composure doesn't mean weakness. Too often in politics, especially for women, calmness is mistaken for passivity. But Crockett showed that it can be a calculated strategy to seize control. By not escalating, she avoided appearing petty or rattled, which only enhanced the contrast between the two. Kellyanne's energy, which at first seemed commanding, now looked rehearsed when placed side by side with Crockett's poised demeanor. The silence that followed Crockett's words reinforced that she had won the moment not by overpowering the room, but by centering it back to substance. There's also something timeless about the way composure can transform an interaction. In debates, hearings, or even courtroom exchanges, the person who manages to remain calm while others lash out often becomes the one the audience instinctively trusts. It signals confidence, credibility, and control. Crockett embodied that fully, showing that she didn't need to raise her voice to raise the impact of her point. Her presence alone shifted the atmosphere from chaos to clarity. Kellyanne may have expected a sparring verbal duel where both sides tried to outdo one another with quick wit and louder tones. What she faced instead was someone who stripped the performance away. Crockett's composure exposed the weakness in Kellyanne's attack. It wasn't rooted in substance. Once that was revealed, there was little for Conway to hold on to. That's why the room fell silent. Everyone could see the contrast. Composure as a tool in political exchanges isn't about staying quiet, it's about knowing when to speak and how to control the temperature of the room. Crockett showed that being calm doesn't mean being passive. It means being strategic. In a space where people expect shouting matches, her steadiness itself became shocking, and that's why the moment lingered long after it ended. Kellyanne Conway's criticism was designed to land like daggers, but what Jasmine Crockett did in her response was not to throw daggers back, it was to hold up a mirror. When Conway accused her of being all performance and no substance, Crockett didn't waste time defending herself emotionally or trying to explain away the accusations. Instead, she leaned into contrast, turning the critique into an opportunity to highlight the very differences that separated the two of them. This was not about who could speak the loudest. It was about who could show the clearest divide between spin and substance. When Crockett began her reply, she didn't dismiss Conway outright. She acknowledged the framing of the argument, but then twisted it, calmly pointing out that Kellyanne had made a career out of polished catchphrases and media-ready quips that often distracted from policy failures. By doing this, she drew the audience's attention to a deeper truth that someone like Conway thrived on television soundbites, while she herself had been doing the work in hearings, drafting legislation, and showing up for her constituents. Crockett's approach wasn't about saying, "You're wrong about me." It was about saying, "Your critique tells us more about you than it does about me." That kind of reversal is powerful in political exchanges. Rather than spending energy denying the charge, Crockett exposed the weakness in Conway's argument. She reminded everyone that real effectiveness isn't about dominating a headline or winning a viral moment, but about the tangible impact a lawmaker can have. The more Conway leaned on style, the more Crockett leaned on substance, making the contrast unavoidable. She gave examples of the work she had done on committees, the battles she had fought in hearings, and the policies she had supported that directly touched communities in need. By stacking evidence next to Conway's rhetoric, she let the room itself decide which held more value. At asterisk, what made the moment sting for Conway was how Crockett never had to insult her to make the point. She simply let the comparison speak for itself. If being loud and rehearsed made someone effective, Crockett said in one of her sharpest lines, then yes, you'd have the crown. But effectiveness is measured in results, not airtime. That single sentence captured the heart of the contrast. Conway had mastered media spin, but Crockett was showing that results outlast rehearsed lines. Asterisk. The brilliance of Crockett's method is that she wasn't just speaking to Kellyanne, she was speaking to everyone in the room, and to everyone who would later watch the clip. By turning Conway's attack into a foil, she made the moment bigger than the exchange. It became about two models of politics, one driven by performance and one rooted in work. In doing so, she positioned herself not only as an equal but as someone whose credibility could not be overshadowed by practiced talking points. Asterisk. The contrast also underscored something deeper about how audiences process conflict. People may enjoy the entertainment of a sparring match, but when they see one person take the high ground with evidence, clarity, and poise, it resonates differently. Crockett didn't have to convince the room to side with her outright. She simply showed that her approach carried more weight. Silence followed not because people were afraid to speak, but because the clarity of the contrast left nothing more to be said. Asterisk. Kellyanne had tried to box Crockett in as a politician who thrived on drama, but Crockett's response dismantled that framing by refusing to play into it. Instead, she drew a line between spin and service, between style and substance, and she stood firmly on the side that history tends to reward. In politics, reputations often outlive moments, and Crockett demonstrated that by grounding herself in results. She could rise above the temporary spectacle that Conway had tried to create. Asterisk. In the end, the sharpest part of the exchange wasn't Crockett's tone, or even her words, it was the undeniable contrast she exposed. She turned what could have been a defensive battle into a defining moment of clarity, showing that substance has the final word when set against spin. Precision is often underestimated in the world of political exchanges, but Jasmine Crockett showed how carefully chosen words can carry more force than a barrage of loud arguments. Kellyanne Conway came prepared with the kind of sharp, cutting commentary that had earned her a reputation as one of the fiercest defenders of her side. Her attacks were layered with mockery, her tone rehearsed in a way that suggested she had said similar things countless times before. But Crockett didn't meet that energy with equal aggression. Instead, she leaned on precision, and that made all the difference. Asterisk. When she finally leaned toward the microphone, Crockett didn't rush. Her pace was deliberate, each word selected to land exactly where it needed to. She didn't try to cover every angle or overwhelm Conway with a flood of counterpoint. She picked the key accusations Conway had thrown her way and addressed them one by one, calmly dismantling them. This gave the sense that she was not only listening but also refusing to be distracted by noise. That kind of focus turned her response into something sharper than any outburst could have been. Asterisk. The most memorable line of her rebuttal was when she said, if being loud and rehearsed made someone effective, then yes, you'd have the crown. But effectiveness is measured in results, not airtime. That sentence was not long, not overly complicated, but it was crafted in such a way that it pierced through everything Conway had said before. It boiled down the entire critique into a single, undeniable point. Being heard doesn't always mean being impactful. Conway's reputation for clever phrases and quick quips suddenly seemed hollow in the face of that simple but cutting statement. Asterisk. Precision also meant Crockett knew what not to say. She didn't wander off into tangents or let her emotions dictate her tone. She avoided insulting Conway's character or appearance, refusing to give her opponent any chance to twist her words later. In fact, Crockett's restraint amplified the sharpness of her response. It felt like watching someone use a scalpel while the other person swung a hammer. One tool may be louder, but the other leaves a mark that cannot be ignored. Asterisk. The audience recognized this almost immediately. As Conway's earlier jabs had sparked chuckles and murmurs, Crockett's precise wording brought silence. That silence was not empty. It was charged, as if everyone in the room was processing the weight of what had just been said. Precision doesn't always get applause in the moment, but it creates impact that lingers. Crockett's choice of words ensured that people wouldn't just remember that she clapped back. They would remember how she did it. Asterisk. It's worth noting that Kellyanne herself seemed to recognize the shift. She had started the exchange with her trademark smirk, confident in her ability to dominate with practiced wit. But as Crockett's words cut through, her expression thinned. Conway knew the danger of precision because she had used it herself in the past. She had built much of her career on carefully timed lines that traveled further than long explanations ever could. And now she was facing someone who used the same weapon but in a more restrained and effective way. Asterisk. Crockett's precision also gave her authority. In a setting where voices often overlap and exchanges can descend into a shouting match, Her clarity stood out as leadership. It wasn't just about defending herself. It was about showing that she could cut through distraction and bring the room back to focus. That's the kind of control that resonates beyond a single moment. It tells the audience that she can handle pressure without losing sight of the bigger picture. Asterisk by the end of her response, there was no room left for Conway to spin the exchange. Every jab she had thrown had been answered with surgical accuracy. Crockett didn't just win the moment by clapping back, she redefined the terms of the debate. She showed that precision doesn't just neutralize an attack, it makes the attack itself look clumsy. And in politics, where perception is everything, that kind of sharpness can outweigh volume every single time. The silence that filled the room after Jasmine Crockett's response was perhaps the most telling part of the entire exchange. Words had been traded back and forth, Kellyanne Conway delivering her signature style of sharp critique, and Crockett answering with calm precision. But it was the pause afterward, the absence of sound, that defined the moment. In politics, silence is rare. Spaces are usually filled with chatter, laughter, murmurs, or applause. To command silence is to hold the room in a way that few can manage, and Crockett's words carried enough weight to do exactly that. Asterisk. Kellyanne had entered the exchange with the confidence of someone used to controlling narratives. She had spent years speaking in rapid-fire soundbites on national television, never allowing a pause for her opponent to slip in, always ensuring she had the final word. That confidence was evident when she launched her critique of Crockett, framing her as someone chasing headlines rather than doing real work. Her words were met with reactions in the room, some nods, some smirks, even a few whispers. Conway thrived in those environments where noise validated her presence. But Crockett flipped the script in an unexpected way. Instead of producing more noise, she produced stillness. Asterisk when she delivered her sharpest line about results mattering more than airtime, the effect wasn't immediate. Applause, it was quiet. That quietness wasn't a lack of reaction, it was the clearest reaction possible. It was the sound of people processing, realizing that what had just been said cut through the layers of performance and landed deeper than anyone had expected. Silence often speaks louder than cheers because it shows that people have been disarmed. It creates a space where words echo longer than they would in a flurry of claps or laughter. Asterisk. Kellyanne herself seemed momentarily caught in that silence. For someone who built a career on filling the air with confident spins and clever phrasing, the absence of response was striking. The smirk she had worn earlier softened, and her posture shifted just slightly, as though she understood that Crockett's reply had hit a mark she could not easily cover. That's the power of silence. It strips away the ability to pivot. There are no murmurs to hide behind, no quick interruptions to reset the rhythm. All that remains is the weight of what was just said. Asterisk. Crockett's ability to create that silence showed that influence isn't always about being the loudest in the room. It's about commanding the room in such a way that even without applause, everyone feels the shift. In that moment, she didn't just respond to Kellyanne. She reset the atmosphere. The energy that had been fueled by Conway's sharp jabs was replaced by reflection as people sat with Crockett's words. That kind of control is not easy to achieve, especially in spaces where tension runs high and voices are constantly competing for attention. Asterisk. What also made the silence so powerful was that it exposed the contrast between the two women even more starkly. Kellyanne had leaned on performance, quick wit, raised energy, and familiar phrases designed to provoke. Crockett, on the other hand, had relied on substance and precision. The silence afterward acted like a verdict, showing which approach resonated more deeply. Without a single person saying it aloud, the room communicated that Crockett's method had carried the day. Asterisk. In political storytelling, silence is often overlooked, but it's one of the most potent tools of persuasion. It allows words to sink in, it forces people to confront what was said, and it leaves no room for immediate dismissal. Crockett understood this, whether consciously or instinctively, and she used it to her advantage. Her composure and clarity had already made her rebuttal powerful, but the silence afterward cemented its impact. Asterisk. Kellyanne may have thought she was setting the terms of the exchange, but the moment the room fell quiet, it was clear who had truly shaped the outcome. Silence became the proof of Crockett's effectiveness. A lingering reminder that sometimes the strongest impact comes not from the noise that follows, but from the stillness that lingers. It was in that stillness that Crockett's words continued to live, long after the microphones were turned off. The confrontation between Kellyanne Conway and Jasmine Crockett was more than just another exchange of political barbs. It revealed something much larger about how power, presence, and words function in public life. Conway, with her years of experience as a polished strategist, stepped into the moment armed with the same tools that had defined her career: sharp, cutting remarks, and a confidence that thrived on dominating attention. For many in the room, the expectation was that Crockett would either meet that aggression with equal intensity or struggle to withstand the force of it. What unfolded, however, was a lesson in how composure, contrast, precision, and silence can redefine the outcome of a confrontation without ever raising the temperature. Asterisk. Crockett's composure set the tone. She didn't allow Conway's barbs to dictate her response. and by remaining steady, she shifted the room's attention from the performance to the substance. In doing so, she proved that the ability to stay calm under fire can itself be a demonstration of strength. From that calmness, she moved seamlessly into contrast, reframing Conway's attacks not as personal wounds, but as opportunities to highlight the differences between them. Where Conway leaned on rehearsed lines, Crockett reminded the audience of her tangible work and results. The sharpest rebuttals often come not from direct attacks, but from laying two realities side by side and allowing the audience to see which one holds. Her precision made that contrast undeniable. Instead of meeting Conway blow for blow, she chose her words carefully, crafting sentences that carried weight without waste. The line about results mattering more than airtime cut through all of Conway's noise in a way that no amount of shouting could match. It wasn't the length of her response that mattered, but the clarity. And then came the silence and unexpected, powerful stillness that followed her words. That silence was more impactful than applause could have been. It forced everyone in the room, including Conway, to sit with the reality that Crockett had taken control of the exchange. The four elements together, contrast, precision, and silence did more than win Crockett the moment. They offered a blueprint for how influence is truly earned in public life. Kellyanne entered as the seasoned player, confident that her style of attack would rattle her opponent. Yet by the end, she was the one forced to reckon with the effectiveness of a strategy she couldn't match. Crockett didn't just defend herself. She reframed the encounter as proof that politics is about more than sound bites. In the days that followed, the moment circulated widely, dissected by commentators and shared online, but what people remembered most wasn't the back and forth, it was the shift. A room that began full of noise and expectation ended in silence and reflection. That silence was the echo of Crockett's control. A reminder that real power doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, cutting through performance and leaving nothing more to be